Africa has many wonderfully diverse freshwater ecosystems. From the cool rivers of the Fynbos to the warm subtropical wetlands of the northeastern parts of our country. From the crystal clear springs of the Groot Mariku to the diverse rivers of the Waterberg. Fresh water is the lifeblood of our country. Its availability determines the well-being of South Africans. Any shortages or decline in quality of water undermine our capacity for economic development. The biodiversity of our rivers, wetlands and estuaries is under threat in South Africa. We continue to see the gradual decline of these freshwater ecosystems. And whilst there's consensus that we need to conserve these ecosystems as best we can, the critical question is how many of these ecosystems and which ones do we need to conserve in a near natural state so that we can promote social and economic development whilst still conserving these freshwater environments for future generations. This question has now been answered. For the first time, South Africa has an agreed upon set of freshwater priority areas. We now know which ecosystems are the most important to keep in a good condition. We know which natural rivers and wetlands are needed to sustain the hard-working rivers. All of this information is contained in an atlas with a set of maps of priority areas and an accompanying set of management guidelines that has come about thanks to a truly collaborative effort between freshwater and biodiversity gurus from all over South Africa. If implemented in all 19 of our country's water management areas, this scientifically sound freshwater biodiversity plan will go a long way to helping us to sustainably develop our freshwater resource. And future generations will be able to benefit from our diverse freshwater ecologies. This is the story of a national challenge tackled head-on by local experts and decision makers. This is a story that testifies that true collaboration lies at the heart of research uptake. Water's at the heart of society's activities and aspirations, but it's also linked to the ecosystems through which it flows. Deteriorating ecosystems mean that water quantity and quality will also deteriorate. Numerous studies in recent years contain alarming findings about the threat to South Africa's freshwater ecosystems.
The NPEPA project has its roots in the mid-2000s, starting, I think, with the National Spatial Biodiversity Assessment in 2004 that really for the first time highlighted the terrible state of our river ecosystems in South Africa.
This study indicated that 84% of South Africa's freshwater biodiversity is either endangered, critically endangered or vulnerable. Whilst this study only took account of main rivers, the 2011 National Biodiversity Assessment took account of smaller tributaries too. The statistics were less pessimistic, but the conclusion remained frightening. Over half of South Africa's river ecosystems are threatened, a number worse than that of terrestrial ecosystems. This threatened state is a consequence of a variety of challenges. There is the practical challenge of managing vast areas of land to maintain connectivity throughout the freshwater ecosystem. These freshwater ecosystems rarely originate and end in a protected area. On a socio-economic level, the challenge lies in the constant competition for water use from the different sectors: mining, agriculture, electricity generation and manufacturing, as well as domestic use. Freshwater conservation is also challenging in the sense that the responsibility for conserving inland water is shared between sectors and different government departments. Historically in South Africa, and globally for that matter, water and conservation have been managed and researched separately. In 2010, a single Ministry for Water and Environmental Affairs was created in South Africa. This collaborative platform offers an ideal space to govern freshwater ecosystems in a holistic manner.
I think when we talk about partnerships, freshwater ecosystems is the one example that you cannot be able to effectively achieve freshwater conservation if you don't actually work in partnerships, for various reasons that the different role players that are involved, the decision makers in government, the environmental agencies that are concerned about the freshwater ecosystems. All different sectors have got different mandates, so there's no single entity that is responsible for making the decisions around water. And as a result, you cannot be able to work as a single entity and hope that you can be able to achieve those conservation goals if you don't bring in together different role players to play their part basically in achieving the conservation.
Despite the complexities of overlapping mandates, the desire to contribute to freshwater conservation was high on the agenda of many organizations, and thus in 2008 this multi-party project got underway. The partners included the South African National Biodiversity Institute, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the Water Research Commission, the World Wildlife Fund South Africa, the South African National Parks Board, the Department of Water Affairs, the Department of Environmental Affairs, the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. Ultimately, the aim is to ensure that adequate samples of South Africa's freshwater ecosystems are conserved. The principle is that if we can conserve habitats, we can conserve species, and thus a representative portion of all rivers, estuaries and wetlands need to be conserved. Other criteria included areas where populations of threatened or near threatened freshwater fish occurred and areas that are considered as high water yield or high groundwater recharge areas. Free-flowing rivers, which are rivers that have not yet been dammed, were another key consideration, as there are very few of these left in South Africa. Connectedness was also a key, as ecosystems that are connected are most likely to support biodiversity, especially in the case of rivers. Once the criteria had been established, the process of collecting data began. The team used existing and available data, which was augmented by expert input and review. CSIR researcher Chantal Peterson tells us a bit about the existing data sources that were used.
So it was looking at data from the River Health Program, from the reserve determination of the Department of Water Affairs and Forestry, and at that time, and also from the eco-status data for the present ecological status of rivers. So what we did initially was we went around to the different provinces, water management areas, wherever these type of data had been collected, and we collated all of that data and then put it into a spatial form, which is what the biodiversity conservation planning was about, spatial modeling. So we needed to have it into a spatial format, specifically a GIS format.
Expert review of the data was done through a series of 5 workshops that were held in different regions of the country. Some 150 experts participated in these sessions.
I've been in Cape Nature for 19 years, and when the FEPA process came about, obviously we became actively involved with it, and we provided information from our databases and also expert knowledge to the people driving the mapping in terms of where priority freshwater fish conservation areas are. We know these areas pretty well in this province. We've done a lot of surveying across the province, and so we know where the priority rivers and the mountains are, where our indigenous fish, many unfortunately only found in these small rivers, and many that are highly threatened. So we immediately informed the experts that were doing the mapping of where these areas were.
SANBI has been collecting wetland data since the National Land Cover 2000, and each and every year it's been doing some further analysis and updating where data becomes available. So when we were taking on this project, we also had to do some updates on that wetland map. So the provincial expertise did submit some data sets that they had available, and this data was then added into the national map using the GIS software, and that task was undertaken by SANBI and CSIR.
The biggest amount of data that was fed into the National Freshwater Ecosystem Priority Area Program was the aquatic data gathered by myself. And there I specifically focused on the macroinvertebrates because they are very sensitive to certain chemical and habitat changes. And to try, and it was quite a challenge to say, how do we incorporate this into a bigger conservation plan? Because that's basically what FEPA gives us. And the other information was also talks about fish that people have seen in the area, for example the eels. I've personally seen an eel in the area, but I've never caught it. So strictly speaking, from a scientific point of view, we don't have eels. But from a word of mouth and myself seeing things and talking to farmers about it, those kinds of things we could contribute.
The willingness of the freshwater scientific community to share their data was lauded as one of the key success factors of the project.
Some of the success factors in tackling a big, ambitious project like this has been the collaborative spirit of the freshwater scientific community in South Africa. We've had freshwater ecologists from around the country who've spent days in workshops, poring over maps, contributing their data, their expertise. Often we find that the freshwater ecologists who've tramped around rivers in a certain region of the country for decades and have an enormous wealth of knowledge in their minds. And what we've managed to do through NFEPA is to capture some of that and to make sure that that collective knowledge from around the country is consolidated.
There's incredible wealth of both documented knowledge and then expert evaluation based on that. And I think it's not easy, it's non-trivial. Getting that stuff together, but I think the mechanisms of data storage and availability have improved in South Africa, and there's an ethic of wanting to share the data which there isn't in many other countries. So there's this idea that if we share it, we'll prosper together somehow.
Once the data had been collected and processed, some key findings emerged. Only 35% of the length of our main stem rivers is in a good condition, compared to 57% of our tributaries.
Overall, our tributaries are in a much better condition than our main stem rivers, and by keeping some of these rivers, some of these tributaries healthy, we can conserve a wide range of river ecosystems. So tributaries offer enormous conservation opportunities.
And the other reason that healthy tributaries are important is because they help to keep the hard-working rivers that we're using for economic and social purposes, to keep them healthy by contributing fresh water that flows into those hard-working rivers and diluting pollutants, for example.
57% of our rivers are threatened, 82% of our estuaries are threatened, and 65% of our wetlands are threatened.
What we've done in South Africa through our National Biodiversity Assessment is develop a method for comparing the status of ecosystems across freshwater, marine and terrestrial environments. And the important thing about that is that we can see that our freshwater ecosystems, our rivers and our wetlands, are under much more pressure than our terrestrial and marine ecosystems. They're under the most pressure of all, with wetlands standing out as being under the highest pressure even within those freshwater ecosystems. So what that means is that the remaining healthy examples that we have of rivers and wetlands are especially important to keep in a healthy, good condition.
South Africa has only 62 free-flowing rivers, which constitutes only 4% of our river length.
Free-flowing rivers are rivers without dams, and they're a very rare feature on our landscape. Most of our rivers are dammed. We need to at least keep a few of these rivers as examples of free-flowing rivers.
This is important because dams seriously interfere with the ecological functioning of river and wetland ecosystems. They take water out of the rivers, obviously, and that reduces the amount of rivers that flows into estuaries and the sea. People often think that rivers flowing out to the sea is wasted, but in fact it's crucial for estuaries and for marine environments. Estuaries need fresh water, otherwise sandbars start to build up in the estuary and the estuary can backflood, which is obviously dangerous for people who live around the estuary. They also start to smell very bad if they don't have enough fresh water running into them. And nutrients in fresh water flow out to sea and help to sustain commercial and recreational fisheries.
Only 22% of South Africa's river length has been identified as freshwater ecosystem priority areas.
It's important to understand that we're not saying that all South Africa's rivers need to have restrictions on their use. We are recommending that only a fifth, 22% of our rivers remain in a healthy condition with minimal use, so that can support the sustainable use of the whole river network.
The priority areas identified in the Atlas protect over 50 fish species that are on the brink of extinction.
There are many fish species in South Africa that are in danger of extinction, but the good news is that by managing just a fairly small proportion of our rivers, we can prevent these extinctions from occurring.
process of creating a strategic intervention that will assist us to conserve our freshwater ecosystems, numerous products have been developed. The most prominent of these products is an atlas that visually summarizes where these strategic conservation areas are that we need to so carefully look after.
Maps are absolutely a central tool as far as encouraging or grabbing people's attention is concerned.
Our main communication tool for this work is our atlas, and it packages and communicates the priority area maps that we have. So we have 19 priority area maps for each of the 19 water management areas in South Africa. And on those maps we have different map categories, and these categories obviously then have different management implications. So for example, these dark green areas that you'd see on the map are actually river priority areas, and they show that the land that's associated with the river, that drains into the river. And we've coloured this whole area, which is called a subcatchment, in dark green to indicate that the surrounding land for that river reach, as well as the finer stream network that drains into that river reach, needs to be managed in a way that supports the health of this particular river reach, which is a priority river reach. We also have wetland and estuary priority areas, which we've clicked on here. Here you see all the wetlands. This is an inland area, and what we've done is we've indicated which are priorities by a turquoise outline around the actual wetland here. This orange outline now that you see around the maps is drawn around groups of wetlands that we've identified as priority wetland clusters. Now what that means is that wetland clusters are groups of wetlands that are embedded in a landscape that has relatively natural vegetation around it. And this supports the movement of animals such as frogs between different wetlands in the group. And this is quite important if we want to keep these species thriving in our increasingly fragmented landscape. Our final map category are the upstream management areas, which are shown here in the map in very pale green, and they acknowledge the connected nature of rivers and wetlands.
In addition to the maps and the technical reports, numerous scientific articles have been produced that have been published in reputable international journals. One of the main benefits of this research is that South Africa is building a skills base of younger and more experienced professionals with knowledge in freshwater biodiversity planning. Lindy Smith-Adeo, an up-and-coming researcher at the CSIR in Stellenbosch, who has a background in fluvial geomorphology and biodiversity planning, says that she has learned an enormous amount from being involved in this project.
I've been able to work with different researchers in different fields, geomorphologists, ecologists, hydrologists. That all obviously diversified my skills.
The uptake of this work on freshwater ecosystem priority areas has been absolutely remarkable. This has not happened by accident. Firstly, the team has set aside resources to research institutional mechanisms for the uptake of this network of freshwater priority areas. Secondly, many of the end users of this research have been actively involved with the project from its inception to its closure. This has helped to build trust in the projects and to build understanding from people who have experience in the field into the end products.
So South Africa's challenge is to bring in all the people supposed to implement, like what this project has done, bring all the implementers just from the start when we conceptualize in funding and also in doing research, and they make their contribution, and once we can be able to bring everybody together, I think we can improve on implementing, and then we can also improve our ecological or aquatic ecological conditions.
For me, possibly the biggest highlight of this project has been that we've managed to produce maps and guidelines that go with those maps that feed directly into water policy and legislation on the one hand, and also biodiversity policy and legislation on the other hand. And I really think that's quite a significant achievement to have one set of products that meets the needs of both of those sectors. The Department of Water Affairs has been a supporter and a champion of this project since the early days when we started discussing it. And we've worked with Water Affairs officials throughout the course of the project to help shape the outputs and to make sure that we understand the nature of water policy and legislation and the receiving environment for these maps and guidelines.
So from government side, at the national level, there's very strong focus on water resource protection, and this particular project makes a specific contribution to that aspect of national water resource protection at the national level.
PNAR says that the department is responsible for water resource classification, and pilot studies have been started in this regard.
We also conduct reserve determinations for the ecological importance and sensitivity. So the ecological reserve that we do in pilot areas, for instance, we have conducted ecological reserves in the Western Cape for Olifantsdoring area. We are also conducting an ecological reserve for the whole of the Vaal system, the upper, lower and middle Vaal. In that particular water management area, we are already experiencing issues around illegal use of water as well as water quality. And this particular project is making a contribution in that regard to assist the department in decision making when it comes to the issuing of water use licenses in particular. We also set resource quality objectives for the licenses that we issue, and this particular project again enables us to ensure that we not only set those resource quality objectives but that they are achieved in the end of the day through compliance and enforcement measures that we will put in place from our side through, for instance, water resources monitoring and compliance to make sure that those objectives are met.
The Department of Environmental Affairs too are acutely aware of the benefits arising from the use of these priority maps.
There are numerous ways in which this project contributes to the implementation of environmental legislation. For instance, NEMA, which is the National Environmental Management Act, which makes provision and is the overarching piece of legislation for environmental management in South Africa. This piece of legislation makes provision for tools such as environmental management plans, environmental management frameworks, environmental impact assessments, state of environment reports, and so forth. And the input of this project will be valuable when these tools are developed. The timing of this project is very opportune since we are in the process of the implementation of various pieces of legislation. I can think here of the listing of threatened ecosystems in terms of the Biodiversity Act, as well as the implementation of the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy, to which this project will contribute hugely.
It's not just the South African government departments that are benefiting from these maps. Other players in the conservation arena too have articulated the value of working with these products.
Endangered Wildlife Trust is a conservation organisation, and essentially our focus historically has been a lot on species specifically and then also habitats and threats to species. And because a lot of the threats to species, or a lot of species, are threatened mainly by habitat loss, that's also where the link to freshwater conservation comes in. It's an area that the EWT has only got involved in probably about 2 to 3 years ago. We've slowly found our way into freshwater conservation. And one of the sort of focus areas for us, or one of the, if you could say, guides in terms of where our priorities would lie, has been the NFIPA project. That has helped us to really define priority areas. It's aided us in choosing this Croc Marico catchment as one of the priority areas that we would like to focus our conservation efforts in.
I've been in Cape Nature for 19 years, and up to now it's been a very reactive approach to our work. I think one of the most positive things that has happened in the last 3-4 years is the FEPA process. We finally are developing proactive tools at a national level that will be part of national environmental affairs legislation, which will be extremely robust. Cape Nature is already using the maps, and we work closely with Working for Water in terms of prioritising their catchments for alien plant clearing. And obviously our input in our meetings with Working for Water is to say, from a river conservation perspective or wetland conservation perspective, use the maps.
The production of the maps and the guidelines is just the starting point, of course. The provincial conservation agencies, which are the agencies that have the official mandate for conservation in provinces have an especially important role to play in supporting the use of the freshwater maps and guidelines in water planning and management in their catchments.
In the South African scenario, one cannot talk water without talking about the communities that depend on this water for their livelihoods. One such community earns their living on the banks of South Africa's last remaining free-flowing river in the northwestern regions of our country. The Groot Marico makes its way through the area, bringing life to an otherwise semi-arid region. Peter Mpefo, a Koffiekraal community representative, is the fourth generation that finds inspiration from this river.
I was born in Koffiekraal, and then my parents were born in Koffiekraal. My grandparents were born in Koffiekraal, and then the people in Koffiekraal, we have been attached to this river Madikwe for quite a long time. Everyone of my age, we used to swim on the river. We do some fishing. When we have a lot of heavy rains like this one, people in Koffiekraal, as we speak, they're eating fish. Water is always clean. Even on the side of the river, you see that we have, the different types of grasses, and more so then we have tlhatla, and tlhatla is one of the grass that the Botswana people, they make carpets with it, and then it's still even growing today because the water is still clean, it's not contaminated. And we believe that if maybe the water will be contaminated, surely you don't have that kind of vegetation anymore.
This fear of contamination comes from recent mining applications to mine nickel in the area. For people like Peter, the contamination of this precious water source with its historical and cultural links would be unthinkable. In taking up the fight against mining in the area, they found an unlikely ally. While land claims have been the cause of much tension between farmers and the local communities, the passion for their river now sees them rallying for a common cause. Don van der Merwe, chairman of the Marico Catchment Conservation Association, says that they intend establishing a biosphere reserve primarily focusing on the river and the catchment area. The National Freshwater Priority Areas project highlighted that the Upper Groot Marico River in the Northwest Province was the only free-flowing river representative of the entire northwestern region of the country.
I believe that anyone visiting the Marico will realize that there's something special here. And it basically goes about the river and the surrounding areas, but the river is the main artery of life in the area. So we are very grateful once again through the research being done by CSIR and other scientific bodies to realize that what we feel and knew is very special, is indeed so. So we're very grateful for that as well.
Clearly, communities are part and parcel of water-related management and conservation, and policymakers are starting to acknowledge this.
The importance of this particular project is that it also only just build the skilled capacity, but also ensure that there's empowerment at local community level, where people actually engage in matters on water resource management. Because one must understand that water resource management will not be the role of government only to do policing, but we want to ensure that the entire sector, including local communities, take ownership of their water resources so that for future purposes, for instance, future generations are not going to be compromised upon when it comes to water resource availability in the near future.
The uptake of this work has been hugely encouraging, but how will we know that this project has made a difference?
For many years in the country, we have conducted River Health Program, we have documented those reports. And what has happened is that through the River Health Program, we have seen that systematically we're documenting that water resources are deteriorating countrywide. And the importance of the systematic conservation of South African freshwater biodiversity was particularly introduced to ensure that we now improve on those particular water resources. So the indicators that one would use is to ensure that you enable the minister to report, for instance, in cabinet, that this project is making a meaningful contribution to the improvement of water resources, its natural state in the country, to make sure that there are socio-economic benefits from the resource for many years to come. So one of the important indicators for me would be the improvement of the resource itself.
In the medium to long term, we need to see the differences on the ground. It's going to be no good having the FEPAs and then in 5-10 years time most of them have got dams built on them, they've got polluted water running through them, they've been stocked with alien fish. In other words, they're in a lot worse condition than they are now.
Is it all doom and gloom? Or will this work, along with other good work on South Africa's freshwater ecosystems, help to turn things around in South Africa?
The future of freshwater biodiversity and ecology, I'm very optimistic about it because we have a number of exciting initiatives such as this one in terms of systematic conservation.
This project is a perfect example of how we jointly can take responsibility for the future of our freshwater ecology.
If you look at it just from a human perception sort of aspect, where else are you going to drink the water? Where else are you going to swim safely in the water? We owe it to ourselves to keep something intact that we can show our kids and their children what a river looks like, that you can actually drink the water straight out of it.
South Africa has an enormous wealth and diversity of freshwater ecosystems, and this is part of our natural heritage which we should look after and feel proud of. Healthy rivers and wetlands, for example, not only inspire our people and our nation and our visitors, but they also provide very valuable ecosystem service benefits that contribute to the long-term prosperity of our nation.